Side Youth. If you're seeing this, it's Sunday evening, but these pre-recorded things are weird because I'm recording this literally a minute after I recorded the last one. Um, Again, if you didn't see that, I'm in my in-laws' basement, my brother and sister-in-law's basement, in their office space, and so I had a chance to just record some stuff to put out for you guys today. And since Anna and I are going to be driving home today, and so this is Deuteronomy Part 2, our at a glance Part 2 of Deuteronomy. This is Covenant 3.0. Um, we're going to talk about why it's Covenant 3.0 and not just the same covenant. It is the same covenant, but it's applied in a new context, which makes it 3.0 in my opinion. So before we get into it, if you weren't here this morning, just an update. It's going to be July 5th next time we see you guys in person, probably. Um, if that changes, we'll let you know. Just keep an eye on Facebook, Instagram, that type of thing. Excuse me. But the other part is we will be getting information to you guys about June events soon. We do have a bunch of stuff ready for summer, and it's just kind of plugging in where we want certain things for summer and where stuff is going to fall. So just keep an eye on that. But we're looking forward to seeing you guys again soon. But this is in lieu of youth group for Sunday evening, and we're going to be continuing our study of Deuteronomy right now. Let's go. So last week or 2 weeks ago, maybe, can't remember. Time's weird. We began Deuteronomy, and what we need to remember as we get back into Deuteronomy again this week is Deuteronomy is just a big message given by Moses to the new generation of Israelites who are getting ready to go in and take the promised land. They're staged right on the edge of the land, and one of the things we looked at the last in part one was it should have taken them like 11 days to make the trip between the mountain they started on and the edge of the land. But because they did not respond in faith and go into the land the first time, they wandered for 40 years. God wandered with them for 40 years so that way that generation could die off. And now this new generation has arrived, and they are the ones that get to go in and take the land. So last week we looked at just kind of the start of the book, and it's this idea of learning from history. Moses kind of gives them this big history lesson. He's like, new generation, don't think that is old news, because you need to learn from the past in order to change the future. That's Moses' message to this new generation. And this week Moses begins, and he gives a part of like what I said is I'm calling Covenant 3.0, because Moses has reiterated it to these people a few times, but this is the third big swath of it that we get as far as the timeline of the people of Israel. So yeah, let's just go ahead and get started. We're going to be in Deuteronomy chapter 5 to start. In verse 1, it says, "And Moses summoned all Israel and said to them, Hear, O Israel, the statutes and the rules that I speak in your hearing today, and you shall learn them and be careful to do them. The Lord your God made a covenant with us in Horeb. Now, not with your fathers did the Lord make this covenant, but with us, who are all of us here alive today. The Lord spoke with you face to face at the mountain out of the midst of the fire, while I stood between the Lord and you at that time to declare to you the word of the Lord. For you were afraid because of the fire, and you did not go up into the mountain. He said, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery." We're going to stop there. And from there, Moses goes on to give the 10 Commandments again. But the interesting thing here is in verse 3, Moses tells them that this covenant was not made with your fathers. Now, it was made with their fathers. God definitely was communicating with their ancestors about this covenant. But what Moses is trying to get at here is that just because it took place way back there in history does not mean that it does not apply to you today. That is what he's trying to get this new generation to buy into. He's like, the covenant that God gave, it's for y'all too. It's for you guys too, to this new generation going in. He goes, so in other words, we need to go over it, because if you are expected to live out your half of the covenant, your portion of it in the land, you're going to need to know what it is. And so that's why Moses starts out outlining the 10 Commandments. And remember those, just a quick summary of the 10 Commandments, those can be summed up as the laws or the commandments on how people should interact with their God and how people should interact with fellow people in the world. And And at the end of the section, Moses tells them to walk in the way that the Lord has commanded, that they may have long life, and that it will go well with them, and that they will dwell long in the land. In other words, Moses is saying, listen, guys, doing this is not just a set of rules that is supposed to keep you down. Moses says, no, it has a benefit for you. God has a plan that if you follow these things and you do them well and you keep them, you're going to live long in the land. And if you were here for Sunday morning this week or last week, you know that that didn't necessarily happen, and that they had a good stretch in the land, but eventually God did allow forces to come in and take them out. Um, so then Moses goes on from this opening bit of the Ten Commandments to give them kind of an all-encompassing commandment and an all-encompassing challenge. And when we read this, this section is kind of considered what is called the greatest commandment. And so we're going to read Deuteronomy 6, verse 4. It says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them on a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates." So this passage, the Deuteronomy 6 passage, is called the Shema because of that opening word. It says, "Hear, O Israel." This is Shema, hear. And that idea of hearing, it's not necessarily like often what I do. You guys know I'm into podcasts, so I'm often listening to something, especially in the background. That is not the idea of hearing here. The idea that Moses is getting at when he says hear this, he's like got the finger snap. He's like, listen up, because once you hear it, you're expected to do it. So he says, hear it. The Lord your God is one, and you shall love him alone with all your heart, your soul, and your strength. And you need to make sure that you're telling the next generation, because lest you look at your history and see how your father screwed up and didn't make it in the land, you don't want to do that again. So make sure you tell your kids. And if it's difficult to just constantly make it a part of everyday life, tell them about it as you're walking around on the road. Put it on the doorway and on the doorposts and on the signposts. That way, when you walk by them and they say, "Hey, why is that there?" you can say, "Oh, that reminds us about our God and what He has done for us and how He is good to us." That is the idea that the people of Israel, this covenant, was supposed to be every part of their lives. It wasn't supposed to be a 15-minute thing. They go to offer sacrifice, to check the box and go home. It was supposed to be on the back of their hand. It was supposed to be in their homes. It was supposed to be with them as they walked on the way, so that way they could teach it to the next generation. In other words, it was supposed to be so much a part of who they were that it was indistinguishable from them. They are the covenant people of God, and that means that they needed to just be living out this thing, not as like, well, I'm going to add it. It just needed to be a part of them. And Moses warns the people not to forget their God when they enter the land. He warns them when they go into the land not to then enter into covenants with the other people and the gods in that land. And the people are reminded to remember how God delivered them and brought them out of the land, lest they be taken out themselves. So it's this weird section, and there's a lot of language of Moses reminding them, like, you have been chosen by God. Like, you didn't earn this. God has done nothing but bail you out this whole time. So lest you think that, like, you're really cool and you're really great and that's why you got this, no. You're here because God has brought you here. That's kind of the idea. So in other words, God has kept his part of the covenant. You need to make sure that you keep yours. That's what Moses is telling the people. Deuteronomy 8, verse 17, it says, "Beware, lest you say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand have gotten me this wealth. You shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth, that he may confirm his covenant that he swore to your fathers as it is to this day. And if you forget the Lord your God, and go after other gods, and serve them and worship them, I solemnly warn you today that you shall surely perish. Unlike the peoples in the land, they would have victory and security by way of the one true God. And if they did not, and chose to claim credit for themselves, and try to have victory by way of agreements or idolatry or marriage, Moses tells them that will lead to death in the land. They will perish. It won't last. In chapter 9, Moses highlights the wicked practices of the nations in the land, and how God intends to use the people of Israel not just to give them a promise, but to bring justice to the land, to those that the people in the land have caused injustice. And then we have some history from the golden calf all the way to the point of failure to take the land before the time of wandering, and the covenant is then laid in the ark of the covenant. So at this point, Moses takes the law and the covenant, and he goes to the ark of the covenant and he puts it inside, plops it in, and then we read Deuteronomy 10 verse 12. And now, Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you but to fear the Lord your God and to walk in all his ways, to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and to keep the commandments and statutes of the Lord, which I am commanding you today for your good. Behold, to the Lord your God belong heaven and the heaven of heavens, the earth with all that is in it. Yet the Lord set his heart in love on your fathers and chose their offspring after them, you above all peoples as you are this day. Circumcise therefore your heart and be no longer stubborn. For the Lord your God is God of gods and Lord of lords, the great, the mighty, and the awesome God, who is not partial and takes no bribe. He executes justice to the fatherless and the widow and loves the sojourner, giving him food and clothing. You therefore love the sojourner, for you were sojourners in Egypt. You shall fear the Lord your God. You shall serve him and hold fast to him, and by his name you shall swear. And in verse 21, he is your praise. He is your God, who has done for you these great and terrifying things that your eyes have seen. Moses is saying, you need to get this right. Change your heart. Don't be like those who went before you who didn't get it right. He says, circumcise your heart, cut away the part of your heart that is keeping you from entering into this full thing with God. Quit making it a bunch of rules and a bunch of check boxes, and get rid of the part of you that makes it that, and let you become a part of the family of God, the people of God. And then that you may be able to say that God is your praise, that he is your God. You know, it's easy to praise a lot of things. And that idea that God is our praise, I don't know why that stands out and that it is powerful, but as I read it, it's like that is all that you have. That's what he's telling Israel. Like, be so devoted to God that at the end of the day, he's number one, the one that is your praise, top of the list, credit for all that you have. He's your praise. And then to close this covenant section, Moses tells the people in Deuteronomy chapter 11, verse 26, see, I'm setting before you today a blessing and a curse. The blessing if you obey the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command you today, and the curse if you do not obey the commandments of the Lord your God, but turn aside from the way that I'm commanding you today to go after the gods that you have not known. And when the Lord your God brings you into the land that you are entering to take possession of it, you shall set the blessing on Mount Gerizim and the curse on Mount Ebal. We're going to stop there. But here's a blessing for the land and the people of Israel, but it isn't without the need for a response. He says there's a blessing. But that blessing is only going to come if you can get in with what God is going to do with you when you enter into the land. Notice he says, a blessing if you obey the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command you today. And I want you to think about it like this, because it's easy to read that and go, it sounds like God has like his blessing type right here, and he's like watching them. And he's like, don't think that, no blessing. Rather, God has said, here is the blessing, here is the land, here are the rules of the land. If you follow the rules, the blessing is there and you will just get it. Sorry, I've already given it to you. So the question is are you going to respond in faith and be obedient to this and live within the guidelines that I've given you as the people of God and just experience the blessing? And if you do that, you just experience it. You will have it. But if you don't, that same thing that could have blessed you, if you just fight it the whole time, it's just going to be a curse to you. It's going to drive you nuts. It's going to make you wish for something else, even though God is the one that you should be wishing for. He's your praise. And that is kind of what Moses lays out. He's like, this promise of God is good, but it's only good if we get on board with what God is trying to do there. If we're trying to fight God the whole way, his blessing is going to seem like a curse. So, God lays out his covenant once again to a new generation of people, a new group who hopefully had heard the law and the covenant passed down to them by their fathers as they wandered around in the desert. But now they're told, make it every part of your life. Make it so prevalent among you that you cannot forget it, that you can't help but pass it on, so that way this can be propagated to the next generation. And next week, we're going to look at what it means to love and obey God in the context of the people of Israel in the book of Deuteronomy. What does that mean to love God? And what does that have to do with obedience? So that will be next week. But for now, thank you guys. Sorry we're not with you. We do miss you guys. We're looking forward to seeing you soon. We've got some events ready, and yeah, we'll be back next Sunday for Sunday morning youth and youth group like normal. We love you guys. Take care. Have a good night.